this is energy systems and muscle fiber types. So the takeaways, this is intended to be watched after the programming lecture. If you haven't watched that, it's not that big of a deal. You'll still get stuff from this, but it kind of builds on top of what I was talking about with programming and the considerations that I have. So we'll be outlining the 3 energy systems that you have in the body, and then examples of how they're used in workouts, common faults of how they're used incorrectly or biased too much. We have energy systems targeting on why you would target a specific energy system or how to do it. Then we're going to outline the 3 muscle fiber types, examples of how they're used, considerations for recovery for both the fiber types and the systems, and then what to do with this information once you kind of have a better understanding of it. So first, just outlining the energy systems, we have the creatine phosphate system, that's that pink one right here, and then we have the glycolytic and oxidative. So these 3 systems allow you to kind of output power, and you'll notice here the power output, and then it quickly falls off for the creatine phosphate system. The glycolytic has a little bit slower of a climb, still a decent amount of output, but then falls off. And then the oxidative, this would just kind of keep continuing on for a very, very long time, hours. So getting more specific into that, duration and power, the phosphagen system or the creatine phosphate system, that's 0 to 10 seconds. Think 1 rep max, very explosive. The fuel for that is that creatine phosphate in your muscles, that stored energy, that it's right there and available. Then our glycolytic system, that's 10 seconds to 2 minutes. That's a little bit longer, but still kind of sprinting, still pushing the pace. And that fuel source is glycogen that's stored in the body and glucose in the bloodstream. So we can use that as a fuel source. And then the oxidative pathway, that's anywhere from 2 minutes to hours. Think like ultra marathons, things like that, but you even use it just during daily activities. But it's primarily an endurance. Think standing, working all day, moving around. You're primarily hitting that oxidative system. And then the fuel for that is primarily fats, but you can also use carbohydrates and protein as a last resort. So if you do those extremely long events, you will start to break down some muscles because your glycogen stores and everything have been depleted. But that's a very, very extreme case. You typically know that you're pushing that far. One thing to note on this, all the systems are kind of on. Let me back up one slide. They're kind of all working at the same time. A lot of people like to call it like a dimmer switch where some are just more on than others, and that will make more sense once we get on. So we have an energy system graphics example here. Imagine your 3 energy systems are now buckets. The creatine phosphate system, imagine there's just a plug at the bottom and it just dumps out super fast. So depending on how big your system is specifically that can be trained, that's how much water it can hold, and then all in one go, boom, you can lift. So that's why supplementing creatine for this example would allow this bucket to be a little bit bigger. Then we have the glycolytic system. That is where it has almost like a control valve where you can make it last anywhere from 1 minute to 2 minutes, depending on how fast you're pacing and how much you're asking of it. Or it can all go within 20 seconds if you're just really dumping, like let's say like an assault bike sprint or something like that. You can dump that whole system, and then it'll slowly refuel even while you work out. And then the oxidative is kind of a slow recovery, but also a slow output. So not a lot of power. You can't really dump your oxidative system super fast because it is just an endurance. It just keeps you alive and it keeps going. And typically these will work in tandem. So if you're running a race and you need to speed up a little bit, you start using some of this. And then if you slow down, you can kind of go back to the oxidative. We'll talk more about that when we're pacing in the examples. All right, so workout examples, that phosphagen system, 1 rep max deadlift day. You come in, we put a bunch of weight on the bar, or like a max height box jump where you're just trying to do one thing really explosively. The glycolytic system, you're doing 400-meter repeats with plenty of rest, or like a 10 rep max, or I'm sorry, not a 10 rep max, just 10 rep back squats. So it doesn't have to be a max, but just that longer time domain just because it takes more than 10 seconds to do 10 back squats. And then the oxidative example would be a 5K run where you are just going at like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 the whole time and you're just kind of cruising. That is primarily the oxidative system. Then obviously in CrossFit, we use overlapping systems. So you would see a workout They would be run 800 meters, 10 deadlifts at 135, and then 1 bar muscle ups, 3 rounds for time. In this example, imagine the bar muscle up being really challenging for you. So you would run that 800. That would be mostly the oxidative system. You come in, your glycolytic system kicks in when you start hitting these deadlifts. And then when you want to give it one strong effort, boom, you dump that phosphagen system and hit it. Then when you go back out for the run, if you run slow enough, your glycolytic and your phosphagen systems will slowly recover. If you run this too fast and you come in, that's when you have to start breaking up the deadlifts because your glycolytic system is being used on the run instead of recovering while you're doing deadlifts. And then run, row, run, that would be an example of, depending on how you wanted to pace and what you wanted to do faster, you would be using primarily the oxidative system, and then you could sprinkle in the glycolytic system to push the pace on whatever. So maybe you wanted to sprint the row, you would run slow, row fast, and then run slow again. Now, some common faults of that, of when we're trying to coach people through this or train and we're trying to give them the intended stimulus. Too slow. So we have an example where we're doing really quick sprints and people, and maybe there's only 3 rounds and they pace the first 2 and then the last round is kind of their fastest where they try because they're a little bit nervous. Whereas what they really should be doing is pushing hard every time. And if they truly are sprinting and doing the necessary recovery, their times might actually get slower. That's different than when we program negative splits and we want you to get faster each time. If we're doing sprint intervals and we're saying like 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, like you should really be pushing, technically your time should be decreasing or getting slower or worse because you're not able to recover. And that's what we're trying to force with that adaptation. And then kind of the opposite of that, of going too fast. Maybe we're trying to do those negative splits, or we want you to have a consistent split every time, and you're just sprinting the first one, and then you try to do the same thing, and you're just not pacing correctly. You're getting out of that energy system that we're trying to train. And then not heavy enough is pretty much the same thing as too fast or too slow. It's 1 rep max deadlift day. You're picking the bar up very easily, and we're like, hey, that looks really good. There's no faults. Like, add more weight, and you're like, no, I don't want to add any more. You might not be trying hard enough, or it might not be heavy enough to use that phosphate system that we're trying to elicit. It might just be a little bit more glycolytic, so you're not training that system. And then, too heavy, right? It's kind of the opposite of, like I said, too fast. You're just supposed to be at 70%, and you're like, no, I feel good, and then you max it out, and you're not quite letting your systems recover because of the days prior. All right, so one example that I think really highlights this whole use of these systems is running a 5K. So most of us have run a 5K. Imagine running a 5K at you're pacing it perfectly. The last 100 meters, you see the finish line, you sprint to the finish line, you're able to keep up that pace the whole time. And at the end, that sprint there, it feels good, and you make it to the end. That would be an example of you're using your oxidative system primarily the whole time while you're keeping that glycolytic system in reserves, and then you use it to do that final 100-meter or 200-meter sprint. Now, an example of sprinting too early or trying to ask too much of your glycolytic system would be running that same 5K, but instead of starting that sprint at 100 or 200 meters, you were like, I only got a half a mile left, and you start running much faster. Your glycolytic system starts going down and down and down and down, and you deplete it within 400 meters, and you have another 400 meters. And that's when you have to slow way, way down, maybe even have to go down to a walk, because now the only thing that's helping you is your oxidative system, which is like zone 2, which is a very slow pace to where you're waiting for that glycolytic system to start charging back up, and then maybe you can start jogging or running again. So if you haven't experienced that, it's definitely very uncomfortable and it's frustrating. So that's why pacing that distance is super important, and understanding how fast you're going depending on how much of that glycolytic system you're using, because there is a limited amount. And then in CrossFit, you would just need to know what system you're using, and that is why we would pick to purposefully go slower. Even if you're good at something, you just need to pace it slower so that you have enough stores to do the harder work with the systems that you have available, right? But if you just go hard on the stuff that you're good at, when you run in and try to do a muscle up or something, you may have wasted too much energy to get to that next one. All right, so known and intended biases and some limitations. Let me move me over here. Typically, people know what system is pretty robust on them. If you're a person who loves to run 5K and one rep max deadlift day is kind of like, ugh, then you know that you've either built up an oxidative system or genetically that's just something that you're very comfortable with. And then if you're someone who loves deadlift day and running around the building in 200 meters sounds terrible, you're probably geared a little bit more towards the glycolytic or creatine phosphate. If you're kind of good with everything, depending on what you've been training, we'll get more into this into muscle fibers, but you may just have a really good trainability of your hybrid muscle fibers. And then biasing a training system because of an upcoming race. Often a lot of us do CrossFit and then they're like, well, I want to run a 5K or half marathon or triathlon. And then you start implementing other training zones. So you would have to push a little bit more towards the oxidative pathway on your other days of working out. Maybe you cut out one day of CrossFit and do a slightly longer workout, or maybe you pick up weightlifting and instead of hitting another additional Metcon, you do the barbell club or something like that to just get an extra strength day in that you're recovering from. I don't recommend you abandoning all of your extra systems training just because you want to do something that's primarily oxidative. So the example there was you sign up for a marathon, you cancel your CrossFit membership, and then you just try to train for 3 months exclusively running to run a marathon. It is way better, and you can last a lot longer in your physical career if you maintain everything and then just bias the training. The only caveat to that is if you're getting paid to do that specialty, then you probably have a program and a coach and everything specifically writing you programming to do these things. But for us general people that are just trying to be fit for life, abandoning the other systems for that time will typically give you worse results than just training CrossFit maybe two to 3 days a week and then having a fourth or fifth day with that specific training in mind. And then typically you're reaching discomfort when you're trying to stretch or to push the systems into like a bigger bucket for that example. So if typically your glycolytic system has a certain power output that you can last for 2 minutes, when you or 1 minute and 30 seconds, when you start pushing to try to get that speed all the way to 2 minutes, that's where the burning and that lactate threshold and like oh, my blood feels like there's battery acid, that is when that adaptation, and that has to happen for that adaptation to happen. So that's kind of where when we start working on capacities and 10 rep max squats and running intervals with not enough rest where you don't feel like you're ready to go again, that's kind of telling your body like, hey, we need a more robust energy system. And then you recover from that hard workout that felt a little bit too difficult. And then the next time you do it, it's a little bit easier and you keep exposing yourself to those difficulties. And that's how we get fitter. All right. And then some limitations just with training these things in general is our group fitness classes are only 60 minutes. So you can't run or do zone 2 for 90 minutes in a 60-minute class. And that oxidative system really likes long, slow time. So if you are training for a marathon, that's what I was saying, or something longer, an event, you just need to go out on a day that you're not doing the classes and just ask your body to go for 90 minutes or 60 minutes straight. And that will help build that ability. And then inconsistent days. Not everybody has complete control over their schedule. So sometimes they miss, unfortunately, for like 2 weeks. Maybe they keep missing the Metcon days, the longer Metcon days, or the heavy days, and you're just not hitting that stimulus over and over. So sometimes it can be frustrating because you're like, I want to work these energy systems, but I'm missing Fridays and Tuesdays every single week. And then the last thing is kind of missing accurate data. So either you have an inaccurate 1 rep max or your time inputs are either non-existent or also inaccurate. So sometimes when they start up CrossFit, people are like, no, I don't want to track. I'm just going to do the workout. And then later on, maybe months later, we have a 1 rep max or a 5 sets of 5 at 70%. And they're like, I don't know, the last time I did a strict press, it was 15 pounds. So I'll just use 70% of that. And it's like, no, you're way stronger. So you keep having to kind of go based off of feel instead of having more specific of a actual number that you can use, and then again get much closer to the intended stimulus without having to do much guesswork. All right, next is muscle fibers. So those were all energy systems. Now we're going to talk about muscle fibers. We have fast, slow, and hybrid. So in the actual textbooks and everything, and we'll get into this a little bit, it's like type 1, type 2, all that. Originally, we used to think we only had fast and slow, but then they kind of discovered that some tissues can actually go from fast twitch to slow twitch depending on your training. So here's a cross section of a graphic of a cross section of a muscle that has all these fast twitch fibers, and then it has a few slow twitch. So this would be the athlete that likes to play explosive sports, maybe lift weights more often. They find success in that. And this is a muscle example that would somebody that likes the 5Ks or the half marathons. But depending on their training, if they started lifting weight, some of these, or being more explosive, some of these could start to turn red, and adjust to their lifestyle. And then this 25%, approximate 25%, is some people have more hybrid fibers than others. So some people are very adaptable to training. So they start lifting heavy and then all of their muscles start getting stronger and changing to that more fast twitch. Or if they run a lot, they start getting better at runner. Some people, it's like they are just slow twitch for life. Like even though they're doing strength training and doing all this stuff, it's just not really changing, not a lot. So some of that has a genetic component to what your muscles are willing to give you. So for fiber types and how they're used, we have the type 1, that's the slow twitch. These are endurance, low power output, and fast recovering. And they say fast recovering because it's just they can just endure for so long, and then you really don't take much time to just get back into the fight. Then we have type 2. This is kind of the hybrid fiber where it can be fast or enduring depending on your training. It can be explosive, or it can help you get that middle distance, and it has like a medium recovery because sometimes it's a little bit built more for speed, sometimes it's built a little bit more for endurance. And then this is the type 2X. This is like the hybrid fiber. I'm sorry, this is not the hybrid fiber. This is a very specific niche fiber that is highly explosive and not very enduring. It's just a lot of power output, and then it's done, and it needs a big long rest and then go again. So you would think you're like Olympic sprinters or weightlifters. They do that one big effort, and then they have to rest, and they're out of breath, and they're sweating from literally just like one sprint down the field. It's because these have a very, very high power output, and then they go on vacation. All right, so some common faults in training your muscle fibers is pacing and bailout. And you're going to see a lot of parallels between missing the mark on the energy systems and missing the mark on training the muscle fibers. So when we're programming classes, I'm trying to also get some fast twitch work, some slow twitch work, some a little bit in the middle. And so pacing, bailout, this example is I'm asking you to go at your 2K pace on the rower or maybe a bike, and you're going, but then you keep speeding up and then letting yourself slow down, and then speeding up and then letting yourself slow down instead of staying at that pace. What you're doing is you're bailing out your oxidative system to allow your phosphate system to kind of kick in. It gives it a little bit of a break, and then you're asking it to go back instead of just making it work, and that discomfort is happening so that the body is like, hey, we need to make these muscle fibers more enduring. It just says like, oh, we'll just bail it out with the glycolytic or the slow twitch fibers or the fast twitch fibers. So if you're training for a specific thing, that is why one of the reasons why the pacing is so important, specifically at the muscle fiber level. And then too much volume. So hitting high percentages, we have like 3 sets of 1 at 80%, and you're like, oh, I feel good, and you just keep hitting the reps over and over and over. Instead of developing a fast twitch stimulus, you are now just telling your muscles like, hey, we need to be less explosive and more enduring. So unfortunately, sometimes even if you're highly motivated, you want to do a ton of speed work, but you can't. Once your muscles are done, once those fast twitch fibers are like, hey, I gave you everything that I did today, then you have to stop and do a really good recovery, and that's when nutrition and sleep and everything come into play. You can't just keep getting back at it. And then not heavy enough, right? If you're one of those slow twitch and you just don't really try hard, you won't start to adapt those hybrid fibers to a faster twitch switch. And then too short of rest is kind of the same thing as too much high volume, where you're lifting and then you're going right back at it and you're lifting. This typically only happens in newer athletes where they were doing like 5 sets of 5 at 75%, and then 6 minutes is on the clock, and then they're like, all right, I'm done. What do we do next? And I'm like, how did you do 5 sets of 5? You didn't even, you didn't even rest, because their percentage, they weren't lifting a true percentage. All right, now we're going into recovery. So recovering those energy systems, both just in general, like day to day, and then specifically in class, what we do of how long you want to rest between what we're working. So phosphate system in general takes about 24 to 48 hours. You hit something heavy, you could probably do something heavy again the next day, unless it's like really high percentage or really, really heavy, but usually within 24 hours, maybe 48 hours if it was really intense, you'll be able to do something very powerful again with those same muscles. Glycolytic system is pretty much the same turnaround, depending on how much you stress out that system, but generally you could hit it every single day, as long as you're holding back a little bit. And then the oxidative system is actually kind of just 12 hours. It's pretty robust, but again, you're not getting a high output. So imagine this being like you go for a zone 2 run for 20 minutes. You could technically do that in the morning and in the night, and you're going to be okay, as long as you're eating enough to actually, deal with those calories being burned. Then in class, when we're doing phosphate system work, that high intensity, it's usually 2 to 3 minutes for about 90% of recovering all those muscle fibers. So when we're getting to really high percentages, 90 to 100% efforts, 1 rep max, that's why you need to try really hard. And then if you make it or you want to go up a little bit, you kind of have to wait like 3 minutes to give it one really good go. You can't just get frustrated and stomp your foot and then try it again. You have to wait. Like, that's just the science of it. And then glycolytic system is 2 to 5 minutes. Again, this all depends on intensity and how hard you're pushing that glycolytic system. And then oxidative, that is always on again. So if you're pushing the pace too fast on the oxidative, you're actually just training more of the glycolytic system or glycolytic system. So you're just pushing out of that. So that's all the more reason to, when it's supposed to be like a zone 2, just stay in zone 2. Now, fiber types, very similar. The type 1, that's our enduring, that is a really fast turnaround. And don't get confused with the slow and fast here. This is just slow twitch, and then it is a fast recovery. Then for the type 2 hybrid, this again depends on the intensity that you're bringing, but it's 24 to 48 hours. Those tissues just pretty much take a day to turn around. And then the type 2X, those max ones, that is where you're highly specialized. You're lifting a bunch of weight. You do a 1 rep max deadlift and you PR. Could be 48 to 72 hours before you're able to give an effort like that again. And you just have to yield to that. So then in class, we have our type 1, 30 seconds to a minute. That's something where it's like if we were to do mile repeats, you really only need like a minute, minute and a half, unless you're running really fast. And then that would be more of the glycolytic system again. But the type 2, 1 to 3 minutes, this is again those 500-meter rowing intervals. And that's why you typically see 1 to 3 minutes in that time frame. And as the program progresses, that time starts getting shorter and shorter, because we're trying to elicit a response to make yourself adapt to recover faster. And then the type 2X, those hyper fast, really strong muscles, they take 3 to 5 minutes. That's when you're maxing out. You need a long rest before potentially hitting another PR. All right, and then tying all of this into programming into class, why we program specific movements and strength a few days apart. I think it's pretty obvious now that I'm just making sure that your systems are recovering enough to actually use them. And then why we have a specific number of sets and reps, because most people only have a specific window that they can train that specific energy system or muscle fiber type. And then once it's done, your body starts compensating with other systems, and then you're no longer training that system. And that is, again, the third point, why we recommend specific resting intervals, so that, again, you're hitting the stimulus. And then why the varied approach works. It allows you to work hard every single day, but in different time domains. So you can push really hard upper body, maybe bench press, but then we can go on a really fast run or a really slow run and switch it up, so your body is always working. You can always like psychologically work hard, but we allow for the other systems to recover while we're doing the other things. and then what to do with this information. So don't run up to Meg and be like, I need my glycolytic system. My glycolytic system needs work. Just hit the intended stimulus of the day. And so what that is you're reading the workout, and then you're like, hey, coach, what is the point of today? And then you just prioritize that. So if we say, hey, it's supposed to be a really heavy day with a lot of rest, you just say, okay, I'm going to try on this strength, whatever it is, deadlifts, bench press, whatever, then I'm just going to try really hard. And then the other stuff that we have to do later, even if I'm good at it or I like it, just doesn't take the priority. Along with that is finishing an AMRAP or a rounds for time when the timer goes off. The fault of this is, you know that, let's say it's 5 rounds and you have a 10-minute time cap, and you're just starting your 5th round and there's only 30 seconds left or a minute left, and you slow down and you're like, well, I'm not going to make it, so I'll just slow down and then I'll finish the workout after the timer. You're missing the stimulus. You need to be pushing as hard as you can till that, even if that means you don't finish, and then you just stop at the timer. And that's how we keep you safe with specific amounts of volume and time frame. All right. And then identifying your weaknesses and targeting them with tracks or in specialty classes like barbell club or cardio club. If you're someone that doesn't like running or wants to get better at running, doing it on the side, even just a little bit, will start to help. Don't, again, skip entire classes or weeks just to work on these. You should be thinking about trying to do them all and then just sprinkling in some additional work. And you could talk to a coach about that as well. And then track your metrics as accurately as possible so you have fresh data. I know that you ran a marathon, but it was that 15 years ago and 2 kids ago. Maybe you can't run a marathon at that time anymore, and that's okay. We just need like up to date, typically within a year or post big injury or birth of a child. That's usually a good way to kind of like reset the numbers and be like, hey, this is the most I've done recently. And then considering the human element, you have life, work, sleep, nutrition, all of these things. Even if it's a 1 rep max day, but you didn't sleep or you slept 2 hours and work has been super stressful and you've had a Snickers bar in the last 38 hours, you know, maybe your 100% isn't 100% of what you think you should be able to do. So you just have to yield to that, and you have to do your best outside of the gym to make sure that you can hit the programming. And that's why we're fairly flexible with what weights you use. So that is the muscle fibers and energy systems. Send follow-up questions, feedback, disagreements. If you're someone that's like, actually, I have better information. These are the links that I used for some of the information in here. Tell me. I would love to know if I was wrong about anything or I could be more accurate. I know a lot of times the naming of the systems or the muscle fibers have changed over the years, and there's